They were laughing before Keisha even saw it. Two men leaned against a pickup truck just outside the rusted iron gates, their laughter loud enough to echo through the trees. One jabbed the other in the side and called out, "You the one inherited the old Croftwood place? Good luck with that. Place is a haunted pile of termite food. Ain't nothing in there but ghosts and rot." The sound wasn't friendly. It was the kind of laughter people use when they've already decided you don't belong. Rashida's small hand tightened around her mother's arm. Keisha kept her chin up, though the heat in her chest rose higher than she wanted to show. The borrowed car ticked softly as the engine cooled, the sound like another reminder of how fragile everything still was. The gates loomed ahead, choked by a decades-old weave of vines and a thick coat of moss. One side hung crookedly from a rust-eaten hinge. The air smelled rich and damp, decaying leaves, wet stone, and something that felt almost alive. As Keisha pushed the groaning gate open just far enough to slip through, the laughter faded behind her, but it left a sting that didn't. Then she saw it. The house stood beyond the trees like a slumbering creature, immense and weathered, 3 stories of stone and timber rising out of the green. The moss clung everywhere, on roof lines, statues, even the gravel drive, as though nature had decided to reclaim it in slow motion. The decay was obvious, yet underneath it pulsed an odd sense of grace. This wasn't a ruin. It was a secret pretending to be one. 2 days earlier, she had opened a thick, embossed envelope in her kitchen, her hands still smelling faintly of dish soap. Inside, a law firm's letter had told her she'd inherited this, an estate left by her great-aunt Eleanor. According to the attached call from a cautious lawyer named Mr. Henderson, it wasn't the windfall it appeared to be. A white elephant, he'd called it, a burden more than a gift. And yet, standing here now with the mossy towers rising above her and the neighbors' laughter still echoing faintly down the road, Keisha knew. Whatever waited behind those doors, she wasn't turning back. She was going inside. Keisha and Rashida spent the rest of that first afternoon simply walking the perimeter of the house, their footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of moss. They didn't dare go back inside just yet, not without more light and a better sense of the place. The sheer scale of it was still sinking in. It felt less like a piece of property and more like a small, forgotten country. They found a stone bench near what might have once been a rose garden, now a tangled mess of thorns and ivy, and shared the peanut butter sandwiches Keisha had packed. The mocking laughter from the neighbors had finally faded, replaced by the chirping of birds and the rustle of leaves. For the first time, a fragile sense of peace settled over them. It was short-lived. The crunch of gravel under tires broke the silence. A pristine, late-model sedan, looking utterly alien on the overgrown drive, pulled to a stop behind their borrowed car. 3 people got out, a man in a crisp blazer and 2 women dressed in what Keisha could only describe as country club casual. They moved with a practiced, purposeful air, their smiles not quite reaching their eyes. The man, who introduced himself as Charles Wickham, president of the local Historical Preservation Society, extended a hand that felt like a cold, dry leaf. "Ms. Johnson," he said, his voice smooth and condescending, "we heard the news about your inheritance. We came to offer our congratulations and, more importantly, our assistance." Before Keisha could even form a response, one of the women, a Mrs. Gable, chimed in, her gaze already sweeping over the mossy facade of the mansion with a critical eye. Such a tragic state of affairs. Eleanor was a dear, but terribly eccentric in her later years. Let the place go completely. It's a historical treasure, you know, a landmark. It deserves proper stewardship. The phrase hung in the air, weighted with implication. Keisha felt Rashida press closer to her side. The other woman, a Ms. Albright, nodded solemnly. The financial burden of a property like this can be crippling for a single individual. The roof alone looks like a complete write-off. The taxes, well, I'm sure Mr. Henderson explained, we're here to relieve you of that burden. Charles Wickham picked up the thread seamlessly. Our society has a fund, you see, for precisely this sort of situation. We could make you a more than fair offer. It would be a clean break. You could walk away with a tidy sum, no strings attached, and leave the complications to those of us who understand the property's significance to the community. Their offers were layered with a syrupy, false concern that made Keisha's skin prickle. It was the tone people used when they assumed you were in over your head and couldn't possibly understand what you were dealing with. It was the same tone the lawyer had used, but there was something else, something sharper beneath the surface of their polished words. It was in the way their eyes kept darting past her, not just assessing the decay, but searching for something specific. Their fascination wasn't with the house as a whole. It was intensely focused. Ms. Albright's attention was locked on the intricate stonework around the main entrance, her fingers almost twitching as if she wanted to brush the moss away. Mrs. Gable kept glancing toward the base of the western turret, a strange intensity in her gaze. Charles Wickham's eyes were constantly drawn to the pattern of the slate tiles on the roof, visible through gaps in the canopy. They weren't just history enthusiasts admiring an old building. They were prospectors. It's so important the right people care for our town's heritage, Mrs. Gable said, and her emphasis on the word right was so deliberate it was almost a physical slap. The subtle racial undertone was unmistakable. They weren't just saying she lacked the money. They were saying she lacked the pedigree, the history, the inherent right to be the caretaker of something this old, and in their eyes, this inherently theirs. Keisha kept her voice even, a skill honed from years of dealing with condescending landlords and dismissive bosses. I appreciate you coming all the way out here, she said, folding her arms. But we've only just arrived ourselves. We haven't even begun to understand what we have here. It's a little early to be talking about selling. A flash of irritation crossed Charles Wickham's face, quickly masked by a tight smile. Of course, of course. Due diligence. But don't take too long, my dear. A property in this state, problems have a way of compounding. A storm could come through and finish what neglect has started. We'd hate to see such a significant piece of architecture lost because the current owner was unprepared for the realities of its upkeep. The threat was veiled, but it was there. Sell to us now or watch it fall down around you. They made a few more minutes of strained small talk, their eyes continuing their restless inventory of the property, before finally retreating to their spotless car and driving away, leaving a cloud of unease in their wake. Rashida let out a breath she seemed to have been holding the entire time. They were scary, Mom. They were something, all right? Keisha agreed, her mind racing. Their desperation was palpable. It didn't match the story of a worthless, decaying money pit. Their interest was too keen, too specific. They wanted this place, and they wanted it badly. But why? What did they know about this moss-covered mansion that she didn't? The lawyer's warning, the neighbor's mockery, now this uninvited committee with their condescending offers. It all felt like pressure from different angles, all trying to get her to walk away from something. And suddenly, standing there in the quiet green gloom, Keisha felt a certainty settle deep in her bones. This was no white elephant. This was a lock, and everyone around her seemed terrified that she might actually find the key. Her initial anxiety began to harden into a low, simmering resolve. They could keep their tidy sums and their veiled threats. She was staying. After the Historical Society's unsettling visit, the mansion felt different. It was no longer just a daunting project or a potential financial trap. It was a mystery, and Keisha had become its reluctant detective. The pressure to sell, the condescension, the thinly veiled greed. It all pointed to one thing. This property held a secret everyone assumed she was too overwhelmed or too inexperienced to find. She started simply by observing. While Rashida cautiously explored the grand, dusty rooms on the first floor, naming the dust bunnies and making up stories about the stern-faced portraits, Keisha stood at the edge of the overgrown courtyard. She wasn't just looking at the mess. She was trying to see it. And slowly, she began to notice things. The moss wasn't a uniform blanket of neglect. It grew in specific, deliberate patterns. Thick, emerald veins traced the mortar lines between the stones on the west-facing wall, almost like a living map. On the east side, the moss formed distinct circular patches, clustering around certain windowsills and avoiding others entirely. It wasn't random chaos. It looked cultivated, guided. It was as if the house itself was wearing a living camouflage, a green script written across its skin that she was only just learning how to read. This observation sent her back inside, to the library where they'd found the hidden panel. The room was a treasure trove of chaos, books piled on every surface, spines cracked, pages yellowed. But now she looked at it with new eyes. She wasn't searching for valuable first editions. She was searching for clues. She pulled down heavy, leather-bound volumes on local flora and geology, her fingers leaving trails in the thick dust. And then she found them, tucked away on a bottom shelf behind a stack of outdated almanacs, a set of architectural folios, their pages crisp and detailed despite their age. Unrolling the largest one on a massive oak table, the truth began to dawn on her. These weren't just blueprints. They were intricate designs that showed the mansion not as a single structure, but as part of a larger integrated system. The drawings depicted channels within the walls, subtle gradients in the foundation, and a complex network of what looked like ventilation shafts that ran not just through the house, but deep into the earth beneath it. The placement of certain stones, the angles of specific roofs, it was all intentional. The mansion was a machine, and the moss wasn't a symptom of decay, it was part of the machinery. Her heart began to pound. She rushed outside with a magnifying glass she'd found in a desk drawer, kneeling on the damp stone of the courtyard. She carefully scraped a tiny sample of the moss from one of the thick, patterned veins on the west wall. Under the lens, it wasn't just organic matter. Tiny, almost microscopic crystalline structures were woven through the green filaments. They glittered with a faint, opalescent sheen, completely unlike any moss she'd ever seen. It was a hybrid, a biological growth infused with some kind of rare mineral deposit. Later that afternoon, as the sun began its descent, she witnessed the most breathtaking proof. A sliver of golden light broke through the canopy, striking a specific section of the western wall. One of the circular patches she'd noted was clear of the thickest moss growth. The wall didn't just absorb the light, it reacted. The stones themselves seemed to glow from within, a soft, warm luminescence that pulsed gently for a few minutes before fading as the sun moved. It was a slow, silent communication, a response. That's when the final piece clicked into place. The neglect, the overgrowth, the isolation. It wasn't a failure. It was the point. Her great aunt Eleanor hadn't let the place fall into disrepair out of eccentricity or poverty. She had been maintaining a system. The moss, with its mineral-infused patterns, acted as a regulator. It controlled moisture, it filtered light, it perhaps even absorbed sound or energy. The deliberate shroud of green wasn't hiding the mansion's value, it was protecting it. It was a shield, grown over generations, designed to make the place look worthless to exactly the kind of people who had just visited. People who only saw dollar signs and historical trophies, who would strip it bare without understanding the delicate, living engine they were dismantling. The Historical Society didn't want to preserve a landmark. They wanted to mine it. And they were terrified that Keisha, an outsider who saw the beauty in the decay, might finally be the one to discover what they had been seeking for generations. She wasn't just an heir. She was the next guardian of a secret. The weight of it was immense, but for the first time, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a purpose. The discovery of the mineral-infused moss changed everything. The mansion was no longer a decaying relic. It was a living, breathing system, and Keisha was now certain the library held its operating manual. She returned to that dusty, cavernous room with Rashida, a new sense of purpose driving them. This wasn't a chore anymore. It was a treasure hunt. They started systematically, not by author or title, but by touch and intuition. Keisha worked one side of the room, Rashida the other, pulling books from shelves, examining their bindings, feeling their weight. The first breakthrough came from Rashida. "Mom, this one feels weird," she said, holding up a massive, leather-bound volume titled A Treatise on 19th Century Agricultural Methods. It looked exactly like its neighbors, dull, academic, impossibly boring. But when Keisha took it, the weight was all wrong. It was far too heavy for its size. She laid it on the large oak table and opened it. The inside was hollowed out. Instead of dry text on crop rotation, the cavity contained a stack of delicate, hand-drawn genealogical charts, tracing the family line back generations. Names, dates, and small notes filled the margins. And there, highlighted in a faint, faded ink, was a direct line from the original builders straight to her great-aunt Eleanor, and then a branch that led to Keisha's own grandmother, and finally to her. It wasn't just an inheritance, it was a succession, a guardianship passed down through a specific bloodline. She was not an accidental beneficiary. She had been chosen. This find fueled them for hours. They discovered more books with mismatched contents. A gilded Bible housed detailed weather patterns and lunar cycles recorded over a century. A set of encyclopedias from the 1920s had its pages carefully glued together to create a hidden compartment holding a collection of geological core samples, each labeled with a date and a location somewhere on the property. The library was a fortress of secrets, its true value concealed behind the blandest possible facades. Then Keisha found the journals. They were tucked behind a loose panel at the back of the deepest shelf, a set of 12 identical cloth-bound notebooks. They belonged to Eleanor. The handwriting was a precise, elegant script that became slightly more tremulous in the later volumes. Keisha opened the one on top, dated from the early 1990s. It wasn't a personal diary, it was a logbook. Page after page was filled with observations, sketches, and complex notations. April 12th, 1993. The viridium growth on the western facade is particularly vibrant this spring. The resonance readings at dusk have increased by 12%, correlates with the higher groundwater saturation from the spring melt. The system is active. August 22nd, 1995. The Wickhams made another offer today, more aggressive than the last. Charles's father, Robert, practically salivating over the south foundation wall. They know, or they suspect, their family's obsession is a generational rot. They see a resource to be extracted. They never understand it is a relationship to be maintained. October 31st, 2005. The harmonic convergence with the subterranean lattice is peaking tonight. The house will sing if you listen closely. It is the most beautiful, lonely sound. They watch the stones, miss the bones. They always have. Keisha's breath caught. They watch the stones, miss the bones. The same phrase from the note with the keys. Eleanor was talking about the historical society, about all the outsiders who only saw the building and never understood the living, pulsing heart of it. The journals were a gold mine. They detailed everything: the maintenance of the moss, the seasonal cycles of the resonance she'd felt, the specific threats from the Wickham family and their society. Eleanor documented their every attempt to buy, bully, or weasel their way onto the property. She had been a vigilant guardian, a sentinel against their greed, and she had been preparing for Keisha. In the final journal, an envelope was pressed between the last pages. It was addressed to Keisha in that same elegant hand. Her fingers trembled as she opened it. My dearest Keisha, if you are reading this, it means two things. I have passed on, and you were brave enough to step through the gate. I watched you from afar, you know. I saw the strength in you, the resilience you built raising your beautiful daughter on your own. This world tries to convince strong women that they are not enough, that they should settle for the small, tidy offers life throws them. I knew you would understand that. This place is not about money. It is about resonance. It is about stewardship. The house is not a thing. It is a conduit. It sits upon a unique geological formation, a living crystal heartstone that emits a gentle, constant energy. This energy is what feeds the viridium moss, what gives this place its life. The society, the Wickhams, they have known of it for generations. They believe it can be harvested, amplified, weaponized, or sold. They are wrong. It can only be protected. You were chosen because you know the value of protecting something precious. Do not let their doubt become your own. The house will guide you if you let it. Listen to it. Trust Rashida. The young often hear its song more clearly. You have everything you need within these walls. You are not alone. With love and faith, Eleanor Keisha had to sit down, the letter held tightly in her hand. Tears welled in her eyes, not just of sadness, but of profound connection. She wasn't a struggling single mom who'd stumbled into a nightmare. She was the intended heir to a legacy. She had a purpose, a mission handed down to her by a woman who saw a strength in her that she herself often doubted. The vague unease and defiance she'd felt solidified into a crystal clear mandate. She would protect this place, for Eleanor, for Rashida, for herself. This was the first concrete evidence of the true value, and it had nothing to do with dollar signs. The value was in the legacy, in the secret, in the incredible living system they were now a part of. The $90 million reappraisal would come later, a shocking external validation of what she was already beginning to feel in her bones. But this letter from a woman she barely remembered was the real treasure. It was a welcome home. That letter from Eleanor changed everything. It wasn't just words on paper. It was a key that unlocked the entire mansion. Keisha sat there in the dusty library for a long time, the weight of the journal in her lap, feeling the truth of her great-aunt's words settle deep into her soul. She wasn't an accidental owner. She was the next guardian in a long line of protectors. The mansion wasn't a burden, it was a calling, and she had finally been given the first crucial page of the instruction manual. She and Rashida spent the next 2 days completely absorbed in Eleanor's journals. They weren't quick reads. The pages were dense with observations, complex diagrams of energy flows, and notes written in a personal shorthand they had to slowly decipher. It was like learning a new language, the language of the house itself. The story they pieced together was more incredible than anything Keisha could have imagined. The mansion, known as Croftwood Hall in the old deeds, wasn't built in the 1890s, as the historical records claimed. According to Eleanor's meticulous research, which included carbon dating slivers of timber from the original foundation, the core structure was far, far older. The 1890s renovation was just that. A renovation, a massive architectural shell built over and around something much more ancient. The real construction dated back to a time before the town existed, before the state was even properly mapped. The builders weren't just wealthy industrialists. They were a secretive society of natural philosophers and geologists who had discovered something extraordinary on this exact spot. They had found the Heartstone. Eleanor's journals described it not as a gem to be mined, but as a unique, living geological formation deep beneath the bedrock. It was a massive, crystalline structure that pulsed with a low, steady energy emission, unlike any other mineral known to science. This energy, which Eleanor called the resonance, had peculiar properties. It promoted incredible, accelerated growth in certain plant life. Hence, the viridium moss that was not just moss, but a symbiotic organism that fed on the energy and, in turn, helped regulate and distribute it through the property. The resonance also had a subtle effect on the structural integrity of the stone and wood used in the mansion, strengthening them, making them far more durable than they should be. That's why the place, despite its apparent neglect, felt so solid. It wasn't decaying. It was being perpetually reinforced by the very energy it was built to harness. The deliberate neglect was the most brilliant part of the design. The overgrowth, the moss, the air of abandonment. It was all a carefully maintained defense system. It kept prying eyes away. It made the property look like a worthless money pit to anyone who didn't know what to look for. It was a cloak, woven from nature itself, designed to hide its incredible secret from the outside world. The Wickham family, it turned out, were descendants of a junior partner in the original society. Their ancestor had wanted to commercialize the Heartstone's energy, to break it apart and sell it, believing it could power cities or be weaponized. He was cast out for his greed, but the obsession was passed down through his bloodline like a curse. For generations, they had been trying to get back onto the property, to find and claim what they saw as their rightful, stolen inheritance. Eleanor's final journal entry, written just a month before she passed, was the most personal. "I am an old woman now," she wrote, her handwriting notably weaker. The house has been my life, my joy, my solitary purpose. But a sentinel cannot stand guard forever. The resonance is weakening. The system needs new energy, a new steward to bond with it. The property itself guided my choice. I have no children of my own, but my sister's granddaughter. There is a strength there, a resilience forged in fire. She understands struggle. She understands the value of protecting what is precious. She will not be swayed by their money or their threats. She will see the beauty in the bones. Keisha is the one. I have done all I can to prepare the way. The house will do the rest. Understanding washed over Keisha, so profound it was almost dizzying. The financial struggles, the constant pressure, the daily fight to build a safe life for her daughter. It wasn't a prelude to this inheritance. It was the qualification for it. Eleanor hadn't chosen her in spite of her struggles. She had chosen her because of them. She knew Keisha wouldn't be tempted by a quick, easy sale because she'd never had anything easy in her life. She knew the value of something you had to fight for. The mansion wasn't a reward for a hard life. It was the purpose that hard life had prepared her for. That night, she didn't just walk through the halls. She communed with them. She placed her hands on the cold stone of the west wall, still faintly warm from the day's sun, and she didn't just feel rock. She felt a low, steady hum, a vibration so deep it was more a feeling in her teeth than a sound in her ears. The resonance, the living heartbeat of the house. Eleanor was right. They had been watching the Stones, the Wickhams with their greed, the lawyer with his dismissal, the neighbors with their mockery. They saw only the surface, the decay, the dollar signs. But Keisha, guided by her great-aunt's trust and her own hard-won intuition, was finally beginning to see the bones. And the bones were strong, they were ancient, and they were waiting for her. The appraisal was supposed to be a private matter, a necessary formality for the bank. But in a small town, there are no real secrets, especially not one this explosive. It started as a low hum of gossip, a whispered number passed over coffee counters and across grocery store aisles. Did you hear about the old Croftwood place? The figure, a staggering $90 million, didn't just leak, it detonated, shattering the quiet, condescending narrative everyone had built around Keisha and her white elephant. The shift was immediate and nauseatingly transparent. The same neighbors who had leaned against their trucks and laughed as she struggled with the rusted gate now appeared at the end of the driveway with freshly baked pies and awkward, gap-toothed smiles. "Just wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood properly," one said, his eyes darting past her to the mansion, now seeing not decay, but dollar signs. "If you ever need anything, anything at all, we're just right down the road." Calls started coming in from numbers she didn't recognize. Old high school acquaintances she hadn't heard from in 15 years suddenly remembered their deep, abiding friendship. Distant relatives emerged from the woodwork, their voices dripping with a newfound familial concern. The local newspaper called for an interview, wanting to feature the town's most surprising success story. The Historical Preservation Society, however, went radio silent. Their condescending offers and uninvited visits ceased completely. The sudden absence of their pressure was more telling than any offer. They weren't defeated. They were recalculating. The most surreal moment came when Mr. Henderson, the lawyer, called. His dry, parchment voice was now infused with a syrupy, unctuous warmth. "Ms. Johnson, I must congratulate you on the remarkable valuation. It seems my initial assessment was, perhaps a tad conservative. The firm would be delighted to assist you in managing this newfound asset. Estate planning, tax mitigation strategies. We have experts who can ensure you maximize this opportunity. The same man who had urged her to sign the refusal papers was now falling over himself to get a piece of the action. Keisha listened politely, her grip tight on the phone, and simply said, "I'll keep that in mind," before hanging up. The hypocrisy was so thick she could taste it. Everyone assumed the next step was inevitable. They looked at her, a single black mother who had been struggling to make rent, and they saw a lottery winner. They expected a for sale sign to go up. They anticipated a quick, life-changing cash out. They started making assumptions about what she would buy, where she would move, the life of luxury she would lead. They saw the 90 million as an endpoint, a finish line she would sprint across without a backward glance. They had completely misread her. The money, as mind-boggling as the figure was, felt abstract. It was a number on a piece of paper, a validation from the outside world of what she already knew in her heart. It didn't change the core truth she had discovered within those walls. This wasn't a payout, it was a purpose. Selling would feel like selling a member of her family. It would be betraying Eleanor's trust, betraying the generations of guardians who had protected the secret, and most of all, betraying the strange, whispering soul of the house itself, which had begun to feel less like a building and more like a partner. So she began to quietly defy their expectations. She didn't list the property. She didn't hire a fleet of landscapers to clear the protective moss. Instead, she did something that confused everyone. She started interviewing, but not real estate agents or wealth managers. She reached out to small, specialized firms that dealt in historical restoration, the kind that understood working with, not against, the original materials of a structure. She made calls to geology departments at universities, not to discuss valuation, but to inquire about research partnerships on unique mineral formations. She spoke with archivists and ethical historians, people who valued preservation over profit. Her vision was slowly taking shape. She didn't see Croftwood Hall as a private estate or a development opportunity. She saw it as a research foundation, a living museum, a protected sanctuary. She imagined carefully restored sections open for educational tours, with the proceeds funding scientific study of the Heartstone's energy and the Viridium moss. She wanted to create programs that brought in students, real experts, people who would appreciate the marvel for what it was, not for what it could be sold for. It would be a place of learning and wonder, a testament to the legacy she was now charged with protecting. The first physical sign of this new direction was the careful, selective clearing around the main entrance. Under the guidance of a restoration expert she'd brought in, a crew began the painstaking work of removing only the deadfall and the invasive ivy that threatened the stonework, while carefully preserving the intricate protective patterns of the living Viridium moss. It wasn't about making the place look wealthy. It was about making it safe and accessible for its new role. The sight of workers respecting the moss, not obliterating it, sent a clear message to the watching town. Keisha Johnson wasn't cashing out. She was digging in. And the moss, as if in approval, seemed to glow just a little brighter in the afternoon sun where it was gently cleaned, the crystalline structures within catching the light like a million tiny winks. The house was awakening, and it was doing so on her terms. The quiet defiance of Keisha's restoration work sent a shockwave through the small town's expectations. The pie-bearing neighbors stopped coming. The calls from suddenly interested acquaintances dried up. They had finally received the message, written not in words, but in action. She was not a lottery winner. She was a curator. The Historical Society's silence became a tense, watchful thing. They were waiting, she knew, for her to fail, for the reality of the taxes and the sheer scale of the project to crush her spirit and force a sale. But they were waiting for a version of Keisha that no longer existed. The woman, overwhelmed by clunking cars and past due notices, had been transformed. In her place was a steward, and a steward needs a plan. The $90 million appraisal wasn't a bank balance to her, it was collateral, it was credibility. It was the key that unlocked the doors to the experts she actually needed. She used it to secure a line of credit, not for a luxury vacation, but to fund the first phase of her real vision, the Croftwood Foundation. Her days became a whirlwind of video calls and site visits, but these meetings felt entirely different from the condescending offers she'd initially received. She wasn't talking to people who wanted to take something from the house. She was recruiting partners who wanted to understand it. She found Dr. Eris Thorne, a young, brilliant geologist whose eyes lit up not at the dollar figure, but at Keisha's description of the crystalline structures within the viridium moss and the anomalous energy readings. He arrived with a van full of sensitive equipment, not to appraise, but to listen. He set up sensors in the basement, his face a mask of pure, rapt fascination as he watched the readings fluctuate in a gentle, rhythmic pulse. "It's a harmonic," he whispered to her one evening, staring at a graph on his laptop. "It's not random energy, it's patterned. It's breathing." He became the Foundation's first official research fellow, his scientific curiosity a perfect match for the property's mysteries. Next came Alara Vance, a historian specializing in marginalized narratives and oral histories. While the local historical society cared only about the architecture of the wealthy builders, Ilara was fascinated by Eleanor's journals and the genealogy charts. She wanted to piece together the full story of the guardians. The cooks, the groundskeepers, the maids, the often overlooked people who had done the real work of maintenance and protection through the generations. She saw the house not as a monument to one family, but as a living record of an entire community's silent dedication. Her mission was to ensure their stories were told alongside the stone and timber, making the Foundation's narrative truly inclusive. The most profound shift, however, was in Rashida. The 12-year-old who had been scared of the strange nocturnal sounds was now the property's most intuitive explorer. She developed an uncanny bond with the house. She was the one who noticed that a particular patch of moss on the south wall hummed at a slightly higher pitch when the moon was full. She could often be found sitting with her back against the warm stone of the foundation, just listening, her homework forgotten beside her. "It's teaching me," she told Keisha one afternoon, her voice matter of fact. "It doesn't use words. It's like it gives me a feeling, and then I just know something." She began sketching the patterns she saw in the moss, creating beautiful, intricate maps that often revealed connections the adults had missed. The mansion wasn't just a house to her. It was a friend, a teacher, a living part of her world. And the house, in turn, began to respond to their care. It was subtle at first. A stubborn window that hadn't budged in decades would suddenly slide open smoothly for them. The strange groans and settles of the old structure, which they had initially attributed to ghosts or decay, began to sound less like complaints and more like contented sighs. The viridium moss, while still maintaining its protective patterns, seemed to recede just enough around doorways and windows to grant easier access, as if it understood their intentions were pure. The air inside, once heavy with dust and damp, grew clearer, carrying the faint, clean scent of ozone and crushed greenery. It was awakening, stretching after a long sleep, and welcoming its new guardians home. Keisha's purpose, once a desperate hope to provide a stable roof for her daughter, had expanded into something she could never have imagined. It was no longer just about protection from the outside world. It was about building a bridge to it. She envisioned school groups walking the grounds, learning about unique ecosystems and local history. She imagined symposiums where geologists like Dr. Thorne could present their findings on the Heartstone's energy to ethical peers. She saw the Croftwood Foundation as a beacon for curious, respectful minds, a place that proved the greatest treasures weren't meant to be locked away in vaults, but understood and protected for the wonder of generations to come. The money was a tool. The house was a partner. And for the first time in her life, Keisha felt not like she was struggling against the world, but like she was building a new one, right where she stood. That first year was a delicate dance between restoration and reverence. They moved with a gentle touch, guided by the house itself and the wisdom in Eleanor's journals. The viridium moss, understanding its new partners, began a strategic retreat. It didn't vanish. It reshaped itself, pulling back from windows and doorframes to allow light and access, while thickening its emerald veins over the most sensitive areas of the foundation, its crystalline core glinting like a secret promise. The transformation wasn't about erasing time, but about honoring it. The air itself changed, losing the scent of stagnant neglect and gaining the clean, electric fragrance of ozone and healthy, damp earth. The property began to reveal its secrets more freely to those it deemed worthy. A visiting botanist, there to study the unique moss, was led by a curious Rashida to a hidden grove where the flowers seemed to bloom in synchrony with the subtle hum of the ground. Dr. Thorne's sensors mapped a network of energy channels that pulsed strongest in the pre-dawn hours, a discovery that had him pacing with excitement. The house was no longer a locked vault. It was a teacher, offering its lessons to those who approached with respect instead of greed. For Keisha, the relentless financial anxiety that had been her constant companion for years finally, truly dissolved. It was replaced by a profound sense of purpose that went beyond any bank balance. Her struggle had never been about poverty. It had been about finding where she belonged. The mansion, in its silent, steadfast way, had given her that. She wasn't just its owner. She was its voice, its protector, its bridge to a world that needed to see that some wonders are too precious to price. The mansion itself seemed to settle into its intended role. The groans and creaks became a contented, rhythmic language. Light, now streaming through carefully cleaned, stained glass windows, painted the interior with shifting rainbows, making the dust motes dance like fairies. It was a living thing, breathing in sync with its guardians, fulfilling the destiny its original builders had imagined centuries before. It was no longer a relic to be saved. It was a legacy, awake and alive.